Imagine this, you're up at 5 in the morning, you walk out to the field, you look at the corn stretching all the way to the horizon. The harvest this year is good, the weather held, no drought, no flooding, your agronomist is satisfied. By every measure, it's been an excellent season. You bring in the grain, you sell it, the money comes in, and then you sit down at the table, open your expense spreadsheet, and see a minus $100+ per acre. And this is already the third year in a row, a good harvest. A negative balance, how is that even possible? Today I'm going to tell you about something happening right now in one of the most productive agricultural states in America. Illinois, the Corn Belt, land that agronomists call some of the best in the world. Here, farmers have been operating in the red for 3 consecutive years, from 2023 through 2025, not because of drought, not because they're bad operators, but because the system they're working inside has trapped them in a situation that's not easy to escape. I'll tell you exactly what happened and why. How land rent transformed from a tool for making money into a financial trap. How farmers are surviving and what they're doing to keep from losing everything. And at the very end, the most important part, what's happening right now in 2026 and where this story is headed. Because there's a twist there that most people didn't see coming. Don't go anywhere. Let's start with what life looked like for an Illinois farmer just a few years ago, because without that contrast, you can't grasp the scale of what happened. 2021 and 2022 were almost storybook years for American grain farmers. Corn and soybean prices shot up to multi-year highs. Operator and land returns in central Illinois topped $600 per acre. Operator and land together were generating more than $600 per acre on rented ground. By grain farming standards, that was phenomenal profitability. Farms were posting results no one had seen since the early 2000s. Total U.S. net farm income hit $186 billion in 2022, an all-time record. And at that moment, something happened that always happens in agriculture after a few good years. Cash rent started climbing because landowners, and most of them live in cities and don't farm themselves, saw that their tenants were making good money. The logic is simple. If you're earning $600 an acre, you can afford to pay more in rent. Cash rent rates in Illinois crept upward year after year. By 2023, average rent on high-quality ground in central Illinois reached $359 per acre. By 2024, USDA's statewide average was $269, but on the high-productivity ground in central Illinois, it was still well above that. On the surface, it seemed fine. You're earning $600, you pay $350 in rent, $250 is left over for living and reinvesting in the business. Reasonable. But the problem was that the good years ended, and the rent rates didn't. 2023 was the first year things started going wrong. Corn and soybean prices began falling from their highs. At the same time, production costs stayed elevated. Fertilizers that had spiked along with everything else in 2021 to 2022 were in no hurry to come back down. Fuel, seed, crop protection, maintenance, all of it stayed at the levels that became normal during the years of record inflation. Operator and land returns in central Illinois fell from over $600 in 2021 to 2022 to $266 per acre in 2023. Still sounds okay, $266. But here's the thing. Cash rent was sitting at $359 per acre. Total return from the land, $266. Cash rent, $359. The difference, minus $93 per acre. You work, you plant, you spray, you harvest, you get paid for the grain, and in the end, on every acre you rent, you're losing $93 just for the privilege of renting the ground, and that's before you've paid yourself a dime, before you've covered a single dollar of family living expenses. Pure operating loss, minus 93, that was a year one, and then it got worse. In 2024, the loss grew to $107 per acre on high productivity ground in central Illinois, $107 in the hole on every single acre. If a farmer has 1,000 rented acres, that's minus $107,000 in operating results alone. 1,000 acres in Illinois isn't a massive operation. That's a perfectly average family farm. How did it get this bad? University of Illinois agronomists who do detailed budget calculations for the state's farmers explain it as two factors working simultaneously and in the same direction. On one side, continued weakness in grain prices. Corn that was trading above $7 per bushel in 2022 had dropped to around $4 by 2024. Soybeans fell similarly. On the other side, production costs, while down somewhat from their 2022 peaks, remained historically high. Fertilizer was cheaper than at the peak, but still more expensive than in 2019 to 2020. Interest rates rose, borrowing got more expensive, seed, equipment, fuel, all of it accumulated into a total cost of production that grain prices no longer covered. The FarmDoc economists, the University of Illinois research group that has tracked grain farm profitability in the state since 2000, noted that 2024 posted the lowest returns in the entire history of their data series, lower than any year during the 2014 to 2019 downturn, lower than the difficult years of the early 2000s. Projections for 2025 were also negative, minus $62 to $73 per acre on corn, minus $43 to $71 on soybeans depending on region and land quality, 3 years in a row, from 2023 through 2025, 3 consecutive years of operating losses for cash rent farmers in Illinois. University of Illinois researchers wrote in their publications explicitly, if this occurs, it will be 3 consecutive years of negative returns. And it did occur. But here's what makes this situation especially painful. The previous period of low returns in Illinois from 2014 to 2019 was also difficult. But the average result across those 6 years was minus $25 per acre. Minus 25. Uncomfortable, but manageable. The current crisis is minus 93, minus 107, minus 62, 3 to 4 times worse, and compressed. Not 6 years of gradual deterioration, but 3 consecutive years of deep losses right out of the gate. Now, the most important question. Farms are still operating. People are still planting and harvesting. How are they doing it when every rented acre is losing money year after year? The answer is that the good years of 2020 to 2022 built up financial cushions at a lot of operations. The farmers who managed their finances well during the high-price period, who didn't spend everything, didn't take on additional equipment debt, didn't expand aggressively, built up reserves. Those reserves are now being drawn down. According to FarmDoc analysts, the financial condition of Illinois grain farms was fairly solid entering this downturn precisely because of the record income years of 2021 to 2022. But a cushion isn't infinite, and with every year of losses, it gets thinner. The second survival tool is renegotiating cash rent. This is the central battle playing out in Illinois agriculture right now. Farmers are sitting down with landowners and trying to bring rents down. It's a hard conversation. Landowners have their own costs. Property taxes in Illinois are high and calculated based on historical income data, which means in 2024 to 2025, the tax bills still reflected the record profits of 2021 to 2022. A landowner can't just cut rent by a third. They have their own bills to pay. According to the Illinois Land Values Conference, cash rent in 2025 fell 0 to 10%, depending on the region compared to 2024. The USDA statewide average dropped from $269 in 2024 to $264 in 2025, $5 per acre. Against a loss of $62 to $107 per acre, a $5 rent reduction is a drop in the bucket. The math still doesn't work. This is exactly why alternative lease formats are gaining traction in Illinois. University of Illinois economists are actively promoting 2 options. The first is a variable cash lease where the rent rate is tied to grain market prices. When prices are high, you pay more. When they're low, you pay less. This distributes market risk between the farmer and the landowner. The second option is a share lease, the classic 50-50 arrangement where the landowner receives half the crop instead of a fixed cash payment. At current prices, a share lease gets the farmer close to break even. Not profitable, but not losing money. Compared to minus $100 per acre on fixed rent, that's a massive difference. But shifting to new lease formats is a slow process. 75% of Illinois farmland is rented, and the majority of those leases are traditional fixed rent arrangements. Changing the system requires convincing hundreds of thousands of landowners, many of whom live in Chicago and other cities, and are accustomed to receiving a fixed check once a year. That doesn't happen quickly. The third survival tool is aggressive cost cutting. Farmers are slashing everything they can: fewer herbicides, targeted applications instead of broadcast, less fertilizer, soil test-based applications at minimum necessary rates, deferring new equipment purchases, which is exactly why the used tractor market was under such pressure in 2024 to 2025. No expansion of rented acres. Farmers aren't taking on new ground even when it's available, because every additional rented acre is potentially another acre of loss. The fourth tool is hedging through the futures market. Smart operations sell a portion of their future crop through Chicago Board of Trade futures in advance, locking in a price. If you locked in a corn sale at $4.80 per bushel back in February for delivery in the fall, even if the market drops to $3.90 by October, your hedged bushels sell at the contracted price. It's not a silver bullet. Hedging requires market knowledge, discipline, and the willingness to accept that if prices go up, you won't capture that gain. But in a volatile market, it's one of the few tools for managing price risk that actually works. The fifth approach is diversification. Some Illinois operations are adding crops or revenue streams beyond corn and soybeans. Regenerative agriculture with carbon credit sales, a small but growing market. Agritourism and direct-to-consumer sales, specialty crop contracts with specific buyers. All of this helps, but the scale is modest. The core of the operation is still corn and soybeans, and their economics determine the overall result. There's one more important dimension that rarely gets discussed outside specialized publications. 3 years of losses aren't just financial stress. This is a psychological ordeal that changes people and changes the industry. Farmers who have worked the land their whole lives are accustomed to risk. Drought, flooding, plant disease. These are natural risks, understood and accepted. But losing money because you grew a great crop, sold it at market price, and still came up short on rent, that's a different kind of stress. It's a systemic question. Am I even doing the right thing? Does it make sense to keep going? According to University of Illinois data, competition for rented land remains high, meaning farmers aren't leaving the market en masse yet. But talk of consolidation, of smaller and mid-size operations increasingly losing ground to large operators with deeper pockets and lower average costs, is getting louder. A 5,000-acre operation has a completely different cost structure than an 800-acre family farm. When margins are negative, scale becomes a survival question. And now, the part worth watching this far for, because this story has a twist that changes the picture. Data from August 2025 indicates that 2026 could become the fourth consecutive year of negative returns for cash rent farmers in Illinois. The fourth. This is no longer a 3-year crisis. This is a persistent structural problem requiring a systemic solution. But at the same time, something important is happening. Land rent is starting to fall, not $5 a year like in 2025, but more meaningfully. According to the Illinois Society of Professional Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers, in 2026, rent is projected to drop another $15 to $20 per acre. Excellent land will move from $391 to $374. Good ground, proportionally. That's a noticeable move, though still not enough to get into the black at current grain prices. Land values themselves are also declining, for the first time in many years. Illinois farmland that was fetching record prices in 2022 posted its first decline in 2025. This is an important signal. The market is beginning to reprice assets downward to bring ownership and rental costs back in line with the actual economics of farming. Production costs continue their slow decline. Fertilizer is cheaper relative to its 2022 peaks. Equipment costs are under pressure because farmers stopped buying new machinery, which is forcing manufacturers and dealers to lower prices. This is a slow process, but it's moving. And there's one factor that could change everything quickly: grain prices. Corn and soybeans are currently trading at levels that don't allow farmers to break even. But the grain market is one of the most volatile in the world. One failed harvest in Brazil, one trade conflict, one weather anomaly in the Corn Belt, and prices can shift sharply. This isn't a forecast or a promise. It's a reminder that agriculture operates under constant uncertainty, and periods of loss have always given way to periods of recovery. University of Illinois. Economists who publish detailed farm budgets for the state say it plainly. To reach break-even at current rent levels, corn needs to trade around $4.60 to $4.80 per bushel, soybeans around $11 to $12. These aren't unreachable levels. They're prices the market has seen not long ago. They're not far off. Illinois farmers are surviving. They're cutting costs, renegotiating leases, hedging risks, drawing on the safety net built during the good years. They're doing what their grandparents did through every previous crisis, holding on and waiting for the market to turn, because the land isn't going anywhere, because people will always need to eat, because no crisis in the history of American agriculture has ever been the last one. The only question is, who has enough strength, financial and human, to hold on until the turn comes?